So the battle between Gojo and Sukuna is continuing as we saw Gojo shrink his domain expansion down to even smaller than a basketball, containing not only Sukuna and himself, but also the Malevolent Shrine. This is one of Gojo's many attempts to thwart Sukuna's domain expansion, as he's been unsuccessful 2 times previous to this, since he's essentially just a bad matchup to Sukuna. Since Sukuna's domain is open and can attack from the outside, and Gojo's barrier is more traditional as to where it closes in its spherical shape, but it's kind of just a sitting duck inside of Sukuna's open domain. We also see the sorcerers giving commentary as they're watching as usual, and they have their own theories as to what's going on here. But we eventually find out through Chozo that Gojo was able to manipulate his domain this way from his time in the prison realm. I guess being trapped in the prison realm allowed him to understand how it worked, since it did manipulate space and time. And that's essentially what Limitless does, aside from the time stuff, or it remains to be seen, but Limitless essentially just manipulates space. So it's understandable that Gojo would be able to apply the fundamentals of the prison realm to his own domain expansion, or just how the parameters of it would work, since it all is just jujitsu in the end. But the prison realm is more an innate technique of Genshin. Whoever that guy was, hopefully he comes back. Probably not. But going further, Kusakabe says that even knowing that, I still don't get how he can change the conditions of his domain every time he uses it. And Miwa, speaking as somewhat of a surrogate of the audience, says, "You've been saying that a lot, and what does that even mean?" And he says barriers, particularly domain barriers, typically have set interval and external parameters like volume and creation speed, and by discovering their own blend of these parameters, every sorcerer is able to establish their own barrier. So this essentially means that when you're a sorcerer and you create your domain expansion or develop it, it kind of has like its own set dimensions to it. Like it's only going to be this big, it's only going to be created at this speed, and it's only going to work in a set parameter of functions. And it's kind of just stuck that way. Like once you make it, it's pretty much done, and it's always essentially going to be the same way once you've fully completed it. Like think about making a house or something, but then you can't expand upon it. It's kind of just stuck that way, but it's still pretty effective and it does its job. However, just with Gojo and Sukuna, they're above that, because as we've seen on the fly, they've been manipulating their domains, which is just unheard of. Like changing the conditions of it, as we saw with Gojo. Once he figured out that he was being attacked from the outside, he immediately changed the conditions to reinforce the durability of the outside of his domain. And we saw that Sukuna, on the other hand, also altered the conditions of his domain by cutting off his slashing attacks from the inside in order to make his slashing attack from the outside more powerful to compensate for the durability increase that Gojo applied. Not to mention the whole thing about making them bigger and smaller, nearly 200 meters in a radius, which is just insane. And it's like we're only really going to be able to see this stuff from Gojo and Sukuna, or maybe some other strong characters that we haven't been introduced to yet. But all of this stuff is just only applicable to the very highest level of jujitsu. And I'm sure some people have had issues with this, saying that, oh, it doesn't make sense, or it wasn't established before. And it's like, it was. It's just that we weren't thinking outside of the box so much. And it's like, guys, I would be the first one to call out a manga and stuff like this, but with Jujutsu Kaisen, or with Gege in this instance, I really can't, because it's all making sense to me, at least. We haven't seen anyone on this level yet, especially 2 fighting it out. So it's understandable that they're going to be able to do stuff like this. I mean, in sports, when we see people at the highest level go at it, they discover, or we discover, new things through their super high level of application. I mean, come on. But anyway, Hikari and Higuruma are surprised by this. The whole thing about, domains having set internal and external parameters. And Kusakabe says, you guys are the exceptions. Your domain's open by default as part of your curse techniques. And that's fascinating. I didn't really think about that before. Not necessarily with Higuruma. We kind of knew that. His deadly sentencing domain expansion is kind of like his main ability. Like, that's just what he does. It's like his curse technique is kind of one and the same of his domain expansion, if that makes sense. I mean, yes, he can use the gavel from deadly sentencing, kind of like a curse tool, but that's just more an extension of what his full package ability is. And I guess the same could be said for Hikari, which I was kind of confused about. Because back when I was covering his fight against Kashimo, I was wondering why he wasn't using just his innate curse technique, you know, like what we saw him do against Yuji, where he just summoned like the doors from the train and like trapped him in them. But I guess it works the same way as Higuruma, as to where he can just use aspects of what his domain expansion has instead of just fully activating the domain expansion, because that is the same as him using his full-blown curse technique. That's just how it works with them. Because when Hikari was fighting Kashimo, he always used his domain expansion, Idle Death Gamble. And it's because he has to. His curse technique and domain expansion are one and the same. But as for him just like using aspects of it without pulling out the domain, I guess that's just part of it. Or at least that's the way that I see it here. And that's pretty cool. It's different, you know, than what we see with like the 10 Shadows or Limitless or Projection Sorcery, as to where they're more reliant on just using their techniques. And then the domain expansion is kind of like what they do as like a last resort or their main event, if you will, aside from their maximum technique. But going further, we see that Gojo's domain is about to break. And Akotsu says that Sukuna also decreased his domain's range so he could increase the output of his cursed technique. And yeah, once again, Sukuna has changed the conditions. I guess he performed another binding vow. Like we talked about, I guess you could just do this in your head. Like you don't necessarily have to say it out loud. And I'm thinking back to Hunter x Hunter, and I guess like they don't have to say like the Nen contracts out loud as well. I mean, sometimes they do if they're making it with someone. You know, the same thing with Jujutsu Kaisen, but if it's just like a personal binding vow or Nen contract, I guess you could just do it in your head, because why not? But Sukuna also decreased his domain's range since he saw that Gojo did the same by compressing them into a freaking basketball. But now that Sukuna has done this, he has also broken Gojo's barrier outside of his domain once again for the third freaking time. But on the other hand, Gojo got a super clean shot in on Sukuna. He pierced his chest somehow. I don't know what he did. We are not privy to it. Maybe he shot him with red, not really sure. But this damaged Sukuna enough to finally break his domain as well. So they both simultaneously came down. But to be honest, I think this is what Sukuna ultimately wanted, or he doesn't seem too upset about this. We'll talk about that later. But now that both of their domains have broken, they're unable to use their curse techniques, you know, because of the burnout period that they have. But as we found out, Gojo can heal his burnt out curse technique with reverse curse technique. Something we didn't know before, but like I said, these guys are freaks at the highest level of Jujutsu, and they're able to do things that we just didn't understand before or thought were impossible, similar to the characters that are watching. However, as Angel says, he made the mistake of showing that to Sukuna, because it turns out that Sukuna might be even more of a freak than Gojo. And he's kind of the same as Garo from One Punch Man, because Sukuna just needs to see something performed once and then he can copy it. I mean, not like an innate ability. It's not like he can use Limitless or something like that. But as long as it falls into the realms of like Jujutsu and just the manipulation of it, he can do it. So Sukuna is essentially going to do the same thing. But first, let's talk about Gamer Supps.
Guys, did I tell you that I love Gamer Supps because, you know, they like sponsor me, but also if you haven't tried it yet, you definitely should. Take a shot.
No, it's alcohol.
So refreshing. And now I feel instantly better.
Guys, this is a big one because Gamer Supps is officially collaborating with Jujutsu Kaisen. That's right, and they're coming out with a flavor called Cursed Energy. It comes in both caffeine and caffeine free. Both will give you the energy and focus that you know and love from Gamer Supps. Not only that, but they also got a bunch of shaker cups as well, featuring Yuji, Sukuna, Gojo, Megumi, and Nobara. And all of this will be released today at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, or 12 p.m. Pacific. I am so excited for this, guys. But back to me at Anime Expo.
Link in the description. Code Big Z. Everyone listening, code Big Z.
Code Big Z.
Thanks.
He's going to heal his own burnt out curse technique with reverse curse technique as well. But not only that, Angel also says that with Kenjaku's help, Sukuna was able to split his spirit or soul, depending on what translation you're following, into 20 cursed objects, the fingers. And after seeing it just once, he learned how to turn himself into a cursed object, so this is pretty insightful. I don't really think we knew this before. This is how Kenjaku was able to make cursed objects and have the sorcerers reincarnate later on. He took their freaking souls and put them into, I don't know what the other cursed objects were, but for Sukuna, it was his 20 fingers. 20 fingers, of course, because he had 4 arms. And I don't know if you necessarily need to do it into 20 fingers, because Sukuna, after learning this from Kenjaku, you know, I guess 1,000 years ago, he most recently did it, of course, when he transferred his soul to Yuji's pinky and then force-fed himself to Megumi and took him over. But considering that he only did that with 1 finger, I'm not sure why he needed to do it with 20 before. Maybe because his soul was so big or something, or maybe it was just a contingency to make sure that even if, you know, some of the fingers were destroyed or something, 1 would survive and then that's all he would need or something. It doesn't really seem that that's the case. It does seem like he needs all 20 fingers to become whole again, obviously. But again, we haven't really seen how it happened with the other sorcerers being reincarnated. They kind of just appeared and that's it. We don't know what cursed objects they needed or the process that was done to them necessarily, other than their soul being pulled from them and put into a cursed object. We've only really seen it happen with the Cursed Womb death paintings, but that's different because they were cursed wombs. But hopefully we get that Heian era flashback that I've been talking about for so long. I really hope that Gege decides to go full Oda with that, you know, because when Oda in One Piece decides to finally go into an important flashback, he dedicates time to it, like over 10 chapters sometimes. And I really think that the Heian era needs that. I don't think 1 chapter would do it justice. But after this, Gojo and Sukuna go into kind of just a vanilla fight. Like, they're not using any abilities or Jujutsu or anything. It's kind of just like a standard heavy hitter battle manga fight for the most part. And Gojo knocks Sukuna away, and we go into a rare inner monologue from him. And he says this whole time Sukuna's been stubbornly avoiding using any other curse technique other than the one granted to his domain. That's interesting wording there. Granted to his domain. Does this mean that Gojo knows that Sukuna's cleave and dismantle possibly aren't his innate abilities? I mean, Gojo would in theory be able to see this with his 6 eyes, since using that he can understand how someone's curse technique works. So maybe he does know, you know, the theory that the fandom has had for a while, that Sukuna's innate ability is like Shrine or Malevolent Shrine, where he kind of just can add abilities or curse techniques to it, aside from just having like a standard thing, like, you know, cleave, dismantle, the fire arrow, and whatever else he has. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this, but regardless, I'm pretty sure that cleave and dismantle aren't his innate abilities. But going further, he says in spite of all that, why didn't Sukuna try to use the 10 Shadows technique or Mahoraga inside the domain? And that's something we've been asking for a while. It's like, why hasn't Sukuna been using the 10 Shadows? I guess there's a specific reason to it. And going further, Gojo says Sukuna has the memory of Megumi, my conversation, so he knows I know about Mahoraga, doesn't he? Or is he scared that I'll beat it with a single attack? So that's really interesting, because Gojo did talk to Megumi about Mahoraga, although he didn't literally outright say it, at least on the page, but the conversation implied that he did. And he also told Megumi that, like, I think 400 years ago, I think it was, or something like that, that the heads of the Gojo and Zenin clan fought against each other to the death in front of the hierarchy. And the Gojo clan leader had the 6 eyes and Limitless, and the Zenin clan leader had the 10 shadows. So I assume that Mahoraga was used in that battle for sure. Now, as for him saying, is he scared I'll beat it with a single attack? That makes sense, because that's your best chance of defeating Mahoraga. You kind of just have to defeat him immediately, because he has the ability to adapt to any and all phenomena, as it says. Meaning that if you use like a certain ability or technique on him and he survives it, his Dharma Chakra, the wheel above him, will spin and then he'll adapt to it. And then you're pretty much screwed after that. And I'm pretty sure Sukuna could defeat him with one single attack if he wanted to. And Sukuna probably does know that. And coming into the final panels of this chapter, we see the Dharma Chakra spin, indicating that he has adapted to something. And Gojo sees this because it says, what do those eyes see through? And I guess using his 6 eyes, he can see that Sukuna has been using the Dharma Chakra, even though the audience hasn't seen it. And we found out that Sukuna can do this for some reason, because back in his fight against Yorozu, he summoned the Dharma Chakra without using Mahoraga. And he used that to be able to adapt to Yorozu's ability. So I guess this is just like a nuanced application of the 10 shadows. Maybe he could just use aspects of the Shikigami without fully bringing them out. And with Maharaga's ability, this is an expert play on Sukuna. He just brings out the Dharma Chakra, takes an attack from Gojo, whatever it was, whether he's being hit by just pure Limitless here or the red or blue or whatever, adapting to that. Then he brings out Mahoraga and the Dharma Chakra goes to him, but now it has like the built-in adaptability to Limitless or whatever was used against him. So now Mahoraga doesn't have to worry about getting hit with it in the first place because he's already adapted to it, if that makes sense. Which I think Sukuna is going to do here for sure. And I'm not really sure the full complexity of this. Like, if he gets hit by Limitless, does it mean that he's become adapted to all aspects of it? Like red, blue, purple, even if he wasn't hit with them, just because he was hit with Limitless, does that mean that he's now invulnerable to them? Not really sure. I mean, maybe we'll find that in the next chapter, but I'm pretty sure that's what Sukuna's play is here. Take the hit for Mahoraga, adapt to it, and then pass the Dharma Chakra to him. So now he's just this big, unbeatable beast, essentially. Well, not necessarily against Gojo, but against anyone else. This is like checkmate for sure. Now, coming to the final panel. Once Gojo, I assume, recognizes what I just said, like he realized what Sukuna's whole deal was here, he's like, tisk. And then we see blood coming down from his nose. And I'm pretty sure this is Gojo nearing his limit. Like, even the massive freak that Gojo is, even has his limits. He's not omnipotent. And as we've seen, he's used his domain expansion 3 times so far. We've never seen anyone use it more than once in the series. And Gojo has done it 3 times so far, on top of using reverse curse technique perpetually to heal not only his wounds from cleave and dismantle, but he also has to constantly heal his brain from using the 6 eyes. Even though it's kind of minuscule, he's still using it. But on top of that, he's been using reverse curse technique to heal his burnout curse technique. He's been using simple domain, falling, blossom emotion. On top of that, he came out right out of the gates with a, hollow purple, been using other applications of it, red, blue. He has to be coming to his limits soon. And Sukuna, on the other hand, hasn't really been using that much of an output. He's kind of just been outplaying Sukuna this whole time by using, less cursed energy. And this is just expert play from Sukuna. He's kind of just had the upper hand the whole time, to be honest. He's been forcing Gojo to exhaust himself, which is what great fighters do. Like, if you're going against a heavy hitter, you just sit back, guard yourself, stay moving, move away from their power side. If they're like orthodox, you move away from their right hand, or if they're southpaw, you move away from their left hand, and you just counter when you can, jab and parry or whatever, and just wear them down, because these big heavy power hitters, they're only going to last for a couple rounds. And then once you get into like round 4 or 5, or if you're in MMA, if you just get into round 2 or 3, they're pretty much gassed at this point. And since the counter conservative fighter has been holding back and waiting for their chance, then they just dominate them once they've exhausted themselves. And I think that was what we're seeing here with Gojo and Sukuna here. Gojo has exhausted himself trying to beat Sukuna, but Sukuna is just too smart for it. And now I'm thinking he's really going to dominate Gojo at this point once he pulls out Mahoraga. But that's not the end of the fight, of course. There will still be more than this. I'm sure Gojo has another trick up his sleeve, but it's not looking good for him. And let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments, guys. And if you like the video, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.